Hey guys, it's me again. How you doing? Well, I'm guessing, given that you're watching this, you completely blitzed your way through the first part of the workshop. You've done your times 10, you've landed on a really fantastic idea for your concept, and now you're at the point where you're looking to turn it into an artwork. But I'm also guessing, because you've clicked on this link, that you're maybe a little bit stuck for ideas and just wanting a couple more hints on how to get started. Don't worry, that's why I'm here. But I am going to say that this whole internet online workshop is a bit different from the way that we normally operate face to face. In the normal Mind Gallery workshops, everyone's working with the same mediums, so the same ingredients, so to speak. Now, we're all working from afar with this one, so chances are people have found different things that they want to create their artwork out of. Some of you might have found charcoal, some might be working with pastels, crayons, chalk, ink, it doesn't really matter. But unfortunately, giving tips and hints as to how to work with art materials is a bit like how long is a piece of string. So for the sake of this little tutorial, I'm just going to focus on paint and specifically on water-based acrylic paint. So if that's not the medium that you've decided to go with, it's cool, don't worry. Jump online on YouTube or just Google it. There are heaps and heaps of fantastic workshops out there giving tips and pointers on to how to get started with any one of those materials. So so for those of you that are, however, working with paint, let's kick on into it. Now, again, I am going to be shifting to a bird's eye view of the things that I'm working on, so you won't see my face, which is probably for the best, but you will hear me talking. So yeah, let's get going. So like I said, this is going to be just a couple of pointers in terms of how to do some basic painterly applications and whatnot. We're not actually going to be painting any particular image. I'm just going to be showing you some things like how to load a brush, what sort of brush to use in what sort of situation, and and just talking through a couple of those little bits and bobs. So the first port of call is always going to be, what are your tools of mass construction, as we call them? So because I'm working with paint, I'm working with acrylic paint. Now that's a water-based paint, which is great because it's going to make our cleanup nice and easy. So the obvious tools are going to be your brushes. Now in front of me here you can see we've got a nice little array of brushes. We've got brushes running from nice fine little pointed tips through to slightly fatter, and then we have a nice sort of flat hog's hair brush here, and then we've even got just a general run-of-the-mill house painting brush. Now, like anything, you want to pick the right tool for the job. So we are going to jump into a little bit down the track, but for now I'm also going to show you these little guys. They're fantastic. This is just a little foam head with a chiseled tip. Now you can pick these up from most craft or hobby stores. They're cheap as chips and they're really handy, particularly for laying down your background base colors, for doing washes, and you can also jump into them with a pair of scissors and you can fashion yourself some nice little textured brushes if you want to get a bit cheeky and interesting at the end there. Now up here in the corner I've also included just a couple of household sponges. They're just, your run-of-the-mill ones that you'd find probably under the kitchen sink. Don't use the one that you've been scrubbing the toilet with because that's gross. But yeah, so guys, here we go. You're going to be picking yourself some tools and then we are going to put, if Jem can, this to the side without dropping everything on the ground. Okay, I only dropped one brush. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is our paints. Here we have, I've just gotten one of my dinner plates. My hubby's going to kill me, but that's all right. I've used that because I want to get, so let me just try to adjust the lighting a bit better. I've used that because I just want to be able to see. Oh no, that's terrible. Clearly she is not a lighting or a camera technician. How's that? Can we see what we're doing now? Hopefully. Okay, so I've got my palette here, and now look, there's no right or wrong way to choose your color palette. It's whatever floats your boat. For the sake of this little workshop tutorial, I've decided to stick in a nice cool blue palette. Now I do always encourage people to pick a colour palette where the colours work, where they complement each other. I might ask Trish to pop up a picture of the colour wheel at this point so we can just see what I mean by complementary colours. Now, because all these blues, we can see they're all kind of in the same world here. So no matter where I lay them on my canvas later on, they're going to work nicely together. It's like, it's much like fashion, really. I've also chucked in a green just to give myself a little bit of a pop colour. I mean, although that said, it is still in the same colour family, and I've given myself a white for some highlights. Now, you could chuck in some black there as well, or you could give yourself a little, accent colour. You might want to chuck in some orange, given that blue and orange sit opposite each other on the colour wheel. Okay, now moving on to our surface. You can choose to paint on anything, guys. You might be going with some nice, nice paper that you've got kicking around. You might decide to go with a piece of timber. Nice piece of timber always looks beautiful. But for the sake of today, I've just opted to go with, again, from the hobby shop, from the craft store. It's just a nice little canvas, little cotton canvas stretched over a pine frame. And this is what we're going to work with. So remember before how I was talking about that background, that backdrop colour? So I'd like you guys all to just think about, think of a painting in the same way you think about building a house, really. You've got your base level and you build everything up from there. And painting's not too dissimilar. If I want to paint a landscape that then has, it might be a big grass field, and then I have a house, and then I have a fence, and then I have sheep in a paddock, I'm not going to start with the sheep because then I'm working backwards and I'm having to cut in around everything. So I'm going to start with my background colour. Now, for the sake of this, again, we're not working to a particular image in mind. Jem can't talk today. We're just using some techniques, and I'm just going to show you a couple of tricks. So, the thing I forgot to say is the other vitally important piece that we're going to need is clean water. So hold up a moment, I'm just going to go fill myself up a jar of clean water and be right back. Okay guys, so I'm back. I've got my water. I've just got that in a little container here, just a Tupperware container. Now, what I'm going to show you first off the bat is I'm going to take you through doing a basic wash just to lay some colour down over my canvas. Now, canvas, like brushes, they're quite dry to begin with, and that doesn't bode well for moving paint across a surface. So first off, I'm going to take that nice big sponge I showed you before, and I'm just going to wet that, and I'm going to lay down just a nice layer of water over my canvas, essentially just to lubricate it a bit, so as I apply my paint, it's going to want to move nice and smoothly, and that's going to prevent streaking too much. We're not going to end up with that really stripy look that you might otherwise get. Okay, so that's nice and just a little bit wet. It's not saturated, but it's going to help me on my way. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour off a bit of that water because I don't need quite that much. Oh, and I'm sorry if you can hear noise in the background. I've got my in-laws staying with us at the moment, so it might get a little bit noisy. Now with that water, I'm just going to carefully place my water on top of my canvas. You really shouldn't do that, but I'm a bit pressed for space with this camera angle. Now I'm going to choose the colour that I want for my wash. I'm going to go with this little middle of the road blue here. I'm going to take some of that paint and I'm going to add that to my water like so. I'm just going to mix that in nicely. What we're doing is we're creating a watered down colour. So it's going to be slightly transparent. You're going to take the effort to just make sure that's nice and mixed so that you don't get clumps of paint in the bottom there when we go to apply it. So you can sort of see on the edge of that brush, still a bit of paint build up, give it a nice mix. I'm quite happy with that in terms of colour density. So I'm going to put my brush to the side, and then I'm going to take that sponge again and just dip the end of the sponge into my wash. Just getting a bit of colour on there. Oh, you can see there's actually still a little bit of paint build up. So I'm going to mush that into the sponge a bit just to break it all up. Okay, now I'm happy with that. So now in nice broad strokes, I'm just going to apply that to my canvas. You can see where I've still got a couple of strokes happening. Oh, a little bit of build up. It's all right. The water actually helps that all to bleed off. Now, I'm not sure how much you can see on the screen, but we are getting the colour slowly building up across that canvas, nice and gently. Now I'm just going to keep going with that. That water, we can see some streaks are going to form but that's okay because the water is going to let it bleed into itself. Now, you can play with your wash. You can almost build up a bit of a gradient if you want it to go from slightly darker on one edge of the canvas and then lighter at the other. Now I'm going to, just for giggles, we're going to play with that technique a bit. So to do that, I'm actually going to build a little bit more colour up. I'm adding a bit of that extra blue to one corner of my sponge. Hopefully you can see that there. That's going to mean it's going to be more intense on one side and softer on the other. I'm going to drag that back across the canvas and you can see how that's adding a bit more colour. And I'm going to feather that out with my sponge. And although it is a little bit streaky, like I said, that is actually going to bleed into itself and soften because of that first base coat of water that we did. Had I not done that, I'd end up with a bit of a stripy blue zebra look happening. Now the more colour I add, the deeper that's going to get. And you can just build this up gradually until you're happy with your result. Now, because this is a wet wash, we're going to have to take a pause in a minute and let that just dry off a bit. And then I can always come back in and add extra layers. So you can see that there. See how just the longer we let it sit, the more those stripes fade away into nothing. Now again, I'm going to add a bit more colour. I'm going to pop that on down and just dragging it up again through the canvas, remembering to just keep the heavily loaded end of my sponge on the same direction. Because if I was to flip that over now, I'd end up with a stripe in the opposite, on the opposite plane. Okay, so hoping you're seeing all of that. The light might blow it out a bit, but I will readjust my camera in a moment and we'll get a bit better angle. Okay, so again, we're not having to be too perfect about that because our water is our friend and that is just going to soften itself off. Okay, now, like I said, it is wet, so of course before we move on to the next bit, we're going to have to let that dry. So I'm going to turn off the camera for a moment and I'm going to let that dry off. Now guys, you can help yourself along, maybe pull out a hairdryer. That's what I generally do if I want to speed up a process. But of course, if you've got a lot of liquid on your canvas, then by blowing hot air at it, that's going to move all of that pigment around again. You're going to end up with some interesting ripples, which again can be a fun technique, but not what we're going to be doing right now. So hold tight and we'll come back in just 1 second with a dry canvas. Okay, and we're back. That's nice and dry now. You can see you can touch it and I'm not getting any fingerprints. That's a great size. What I've actually done, you might have noticed, is I've downsized to a slightly smaller canvas in the hopes that you're all going to catch a little bit more of it on the screen. So what I've also done on this version is I've gone over and I've done a couple more coats just to bring up the intensity of that blue. So we've still got this nice gradient going from a darker blue up into a nice light blue at the top here. So that's one way to get a base colour down, but it's not the only way. Of course, you know, there are 101 ways to skin a cat, although we don't condone the skinning of animals at the Mind Gallery. But for the next way, I'm going to talk about just applying base colour as a block colour. Now, again, I'm going to choose my medium, my tool of choice. For this one, I'm going to go with a nice semi-wide flat brush. And I'm going to collect my colour here. And just for giggles, let's say we wanted to do a section of continuous colour running through the middle. To do so, I'm going to load my brush up, nice and heavily loaded. What that's doing is it's actually putting, I hope you can see that there, it's meaning that we have colour all the way through the bristles of that brush. See, so that's going to give us nice long strokes, rather than if you don't have enough colour on your brush, you're going to find you're going to have to keep coming back to your palette and reloading. And that can just make it a bit trickier to get nice long fluid strokes. So let's say that we wanted to have a segment running through here. We'll just do a bit of a abstract space and we'll paint that in. Now I'm going to go like this and run that up through the center of my canvas. Now if you wanted to, you could do your whole backdrop in that block color. quite a nice effect. Or as you can see what I'm doing here, you can do a bit of a combo of the two. Let's make it just a swirly whirly. We're not painting a picture, as I said before, we're just getting that colour down. Now, earlier when I was talking about the tools that you use, if I was to use a small brush, it would take me ages to get this block colour in. And we don't want to do that, not for this example. We're just going to lay it all down in one go, nice and fluid. We can opt to jump the size of our brush up if we want to speed up that process. If I was doing a whole canvas like this, you know, I'd probably use a wider brush again. But I'm not going to use one of my point-tipped brushes, one of my little itty-bitty baby brushes, because again, that's going to be really stripy and I want to get a nice kind of even coverage. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what I'm painting, I'm just painting shapes, but you can see that gives me a nice overall colour. I've got a little bit of white coming through the edge there, that's all right. I'm just going to blend that in nice and gently. Okay, now I want to give it a bit of colour definition. I'm going to add a bit of my darker blue to the brush now. Again, loading my brush up, nice and full of paint. Paint's your friend. But yeah, on that note, I will also say that particularly with things like a wash, the more, you know, you can always add more paint to a mix. It's hard to take paint off a canvas. So here we go, I'm just going to put some little flourishes in here. But see what I'm doing here? I'm trying to come down to a point and I'm struggling a bit because this brush is chunky. If I want to turn that little bend at the top there into a nice sharp point, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to swap out my brush. I'm going to go for something with a pointed tip, like, oh, where is it? Like that. So this brush is going to help me because it comes down to a nice point at the end, whereas the other brush was a flat head brush. So with that point tip, now I can curl it in and get those little flicks. Gives me a bit more control over the way I'm applying paint to my canvas. Okay, now I'm liking those little wispy bits there, so I might add some more of them. I'm going to bring my arc here in and do the same. But I want to always thinking about which tool I'm using for this. And I don't know if you can see from there, guys, but up on that edge, we've got sort of this speckly effect happening here where it's just looking a bit raspy, and that's because my brush was a bit too dry. So again, if I want to use that, that's fantastic. But if I want to actually get a bit of a cleaner line, I'm just going to make sure that my brush is actually a bit wet as well. Not too wet because you don't want it to run off into, you know, every which way. But I am going to just use that to my advantage and clean off that edge there. Leaning in to the side of the brush. Okay, like so. Yeah, we can give that nice edge again, making sure my brush is nicely loaded. And I always flip my canvas around if I'm trying to run with a curve. Remember that, you know, you can only move yourself around a table so much, but you can move your canvas. So we're going to pop that back in there. Going to just flick off, do a little tail flick. On the end. Well, you know what? Actually, I'm going to close that one in. Why not? We're going to do what I just did there was I'm cutting back in. I've decided that I want the flick to actually be the negative space, which is the area behind my paint. So I'm just going to cut that back in and let the white come down to create the point. Running back on itself. And just cleaning off those lines. feathering off those edges like so. Now, I haven't quite decided what I want to do with this, you see, so I'm just going to have a bit of a play, swing around there. And before I get too carried away, I'm going to sit back and look at my image and go, okay, cool, what do I want to do next? It's really simple here. We're just kind of feathering off, feathering off, feathering off. Letting those colours bleed into each other a little bit more to give us a bit of shading. Now again, I'm going to step back and I'm going to let that dry for a moment because I don't want to move that paint around too much before I know where I'm going to go with it next. So I'm going to hit pause and we'll be back in a moment. Okay guys, so back again, and you can see that my paint's dried, but I've also added a couple of little flourishes and gone over that to bring up that density of colour a fair bit, because I wanted to get to a nice point where we had pretty block colour for our image, so that now I can jump into talking about putting in some highlights and defining those lines. So you can see sort of through here, our image is sort of blending into itself a bit. We don't really have any clear indication of, you know, where segments sit, whether or not something's in the foreground or the background. It's all just a bit of a stamp, a bit of a block colour. So if I want to give this all a bit more definition to bring up some of those wrapping, curling lines here, what I'm going to do is I've gone in and I've got a nice fine tip brush and I've loaded it up, nice and fully loaded, with a light colour in my same palette. So I'm going with a light blue, a nice bright light blue. And what I want to do is I want to look at sort of deciding before I put my paint down which areas I want to focus on. And so this is where I'd normally start thinking about, if you're looking at a three-dimensional object, where is your light hitting the object? If the light is, say, hypothetically at the top of the canvas coming down, anything on that top ridge line is going to get a little bit of that light. That's just a little bit of a kiss of light, and the underside is going to be in shadow. It's like when you look at an apple, you know, you can really quickly see the direction of the light based on where you're getting that little hot spot. So because we've already got the gradient in my background, I'm going to work with that in favor. I'm going to sort of say that, okay, this is the lighter area, this is the darker, so our light source is coming from the top and running down. So starting off, we just want to get some nice quick, I want to get some just little licks in there because I want to break up that block colour a bit. So I'm just going to run around like this. So then straight away we can now see that this shape is sitting in front of the shape at the back, right? And I'm not going to worry too much about these wispy bits because I might actually leave them and come back and just accentuate them a bit. But I just want to give that some nice, just a little pop. And I'm going to do the same thing on my top curl up here as well because I want to kind of get a bit of definition there, but I don't actually want to lose it. And if I put a light blue colour like this next to my background, it's going to sort of sink into itself. We're not going to have that contrast. So I'm actually going to favour the inside of this curl, and we're going to bring back that shape from before. I'm just going to put a little bit of a swirl in here. And use that to cancel out the bottom side, turning that into a bit more of a defined line there. Now again, I know I keep banging on and I sound like a bit of a broken record, but because I don't really have a plan in mind, I'm just playing. There's, you know, I'm just going to try some things here and there because it's more about showing you guys some different little brush techniques and whatnot. And so, yeah, so that's sort of highlighting. What you can do as well as that is you could sort of go for a sort of more of a middle of the road colour. Like say if I don't want to go with that light blue, but rather give myself, so bear with me guys, something that's a bit closer to the blue that I've already got on the canvas, and just play with a bit of shading rather than highlights. So I'm mixing myself up a blue that's going to sit a bit closer to our dark blue that we've got there. Hopefully you're catching that on the screen there. I'm going to remember to keep my brush nice and wet. I'm actually going to jump across to a slightly wider brush Gonna jump across to this little guy. Oh, sorry, battery's dying, hold up. Oh. There we go, hopefully that'll work. Oh, I wish you could all see this. I've rigged up my camera to a gooseneck lamp in my studio and a little bike drink bottle bracket to hold it in place. It's all a bit ridiculous, but it seems to be doing the trick for the moment. So there we have it. So you can see that brush there. It's just a little bit wider, so it's going to give me a little bit more to play with surface area. I'm going to wet that brush, and I'm going to sort of say, let's say we want to define between this line, so this segment here, and this curl coming out behind it, for example. So I'm going to put a little bit of water down to the canvas again, like we did that first time, because it's going to let me bleed my pigment across the canvas without too much of a dry brush effect. Now I'm going to take that blue that I've just mixed up there, which you can see is it's actually going to dry off a bit darker because colours do dry differently. So I've just got a little bit of that colour loaded onto my brush, and I'm going to just drag that across the already wet canvas. And I'm going to just let that kind of bleed in a little bit to the top area. And I'm going to drag it down ever so lightly. I'm going to add a bit more water to that because I want that to blend in. And I know it looks like it's not doing much now, but as that dries off, and you can always help yourself along again, take one of those sponges that we were talking about before, you can dab it back and drag it down into itself. Now at the moment that doesn't look like much of anything, does it? But it will dry off, and you can already see you've got a bit of difference here between now this curve and the area protruding behind it. And what that does is pulls this area, the lighter area, into the foreground. So it tricks the eye into thinking that this segment of our image is actually closer to us than this one, because it looks like I've got a bit of a shadow happening here. So you can play with that technique. You can also utilize the two. You can put your highlight lines in, and then you can also just do a bit of shading. And now there are different techniques for how to do this, different brushes as well, but you know, we are in a little bit of a game of keep it simple. So now I've got a little bit, I've got my highlights coming in that shading. I also want to punch that out a bit more. So I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to get some of my dark blue again and run it in behind that line just to intensify that shadow. And now this is the point where if you had maybe a little bit of purple or some black, you could mix it in to make it slightly darker blue again, and just bang that behind that ridge as well, which will just amplify that look that we're talking about. Okay, again, we're going to step away, let that dry, and be back in just 2 ticks. So you can see that I have once again jumped forward, because you don't need to be watching me doing every little stroke and doohickey. So what I've done here is I've continued to push what we were just talking about with my highlights and my shading, pushing back and bringing forward our foreground. So you can see now we've got this distinct curve is sitting really quite obviously over this one at the back here, because we've got that nice shadow all through here and that nice highlighted ridge at the top. And I've gone in with my black and just given a key line, so that just means a line around the entirety of the image. I'm still going up here, I've got a bit more to do, but that just gives it some really nice contrast and definition. So it gives it a bit of that, I guess you could kind of say, a bit of a kind of cartoony look perhaps. It's a lot more linear, but it can be a really, really nice way to just get a bit of dynamic pop in your imagery. So again, I'm just going to continue that round. And of course, as always, the amount of product on my brush is going to be the make or break for, you know, in terms of ease. The second I start to lose my density of paint on my bristles, I get into that really patchy, scratchy sort of look. So just always being aware of that one is going to make things a lot easier for you. Now, I mean, I've got a couple more things I wanted to show you guys in this little powwow, but I'm sort of running out of a bit of space. Sorry, wording not well today. So I might actually jump across to a nice blank bit of canvas, or maybe I'll jump back to the first washed canvas that we did and use that as a bit of play space. But so I guess what I'm sort of trying to show you guys is there's a whole bunch of different little tricks, but that ultimately there's it's just about getting paint on a canvas and starting to have a think and have a play, but simultaneously, if you don't know, if you're starting to go, oh, am I going in the right direction? Stop and stand back. It's always helpful. You kind of get you can get into a bit of a zone, and then before long you kind of realise, hours have passed, or days in some cases. But always remember to stop, stand back, let your paints dry, and see where it goes from there. But yeah, so I'm going to stop what I'm doing for the moment. We'll jump to another canvas, and then we'll look at doing some little tricks using masking tape and creating more geometric shapes. So I'll be back with you in just a moment. Okay, there you go. You can see that I've just laid down a whole bunch of masking tape in a bit of a hodgepodge fashion, because I'm not really worried too much about what the end patterning is, but you can actually choose to mark that out earlier. You might want to draft something up with a bit of lead pencil so you've got an idea. Now what I'm doing now though is I am just going to run my finger along those inside edges, because when I apply my paint I want to make sure that there's a nice good solid seal between the canvas and the tape itself. So that's going to stop any paint that I apply from bleeding underneath my tape. It's going to mean that I get a really nice crisp line, which is what I'm after in this situation. Okay, so once that's all good and sturdy and you're feeling happy about it, you can start playing with your colours. Okay, so I'm going to go with the same dark blue that I was using on the last canvas, and I'm also going to throw some different colours in there as well. But I want to start with my dark blue, and I'm going to select a few of these triangles. Now I'm using a nice flat, not incredibly wide, because I want to get into some quite tight little corners here, but a flat brush is going to be your friend in this situation. And you want to, as always, make sure it's nicely loaded up. So let's focus on, let's say this square here. Can we all see that one? This one here. So I'm going to work my brush from the outside in towards the center of that triangle, because I want to be able to drag the paint off and away from the seam. That's going to just, I'm going to put a bit more water on that brush. It's going to help me out, but not too much water. This is actually a very a situation where you really don't want to over wet your brush or your paint, because it will actually mean that you've got more chance of that paint seeping underneath your masking tape and you'll get bleeding. So I want it to be wet enough that it's going to move, but not so wet that it gets really unmanageable. And again, like I said, we're starting from the outside and we're going to drag it in. That's so that if I do get a bit of extra liquid, it's going to be encouraged to move towards the center of the triangle, rather than, I'm not pushing it with my brush underneath that lip of the tape. So yeah, we're pushing away in the hopes that it's going to continue to give us a nice crisp line. And again, like I said before, that's why you really do want to make sure that your tape's pressed down nice and firmly on the edge of your canvas. So I'm going to go around, I'm just going to choose which of my triangles I want to be this colour. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to bang out a couple of those, and then I'm probably going to come back in and choose a different colour. So let's jump forward a bit, because like we said, watching paint dry, not the funnest pastime. And there we go, guys. So I've pulled that masking tape up, I've gone back in and added a couple of just some black borders and just had a bit of a play, and we've got a really quick, easy way to get some nice sharp geometric shapes onto a canvas if you're finding you're struggling with your clean edged lines. I hope that helped, and I'm really, really excited to see all the incredible things that you produce. Can't wait. Till then, from me to you, look after yourselves. Stay home.